History is very much like a carousel. It just goes around and around. You know, it's pretty. The lights are shining, and you don't realize you are actually a part of history. We're distracted with the noise and the sounds of our environments, but it's just going around and around. And we said all the time, you know, oh my God, the it's almost New Year's, and where did the year go? And we will take something, you know, not necessarily good, and we will repurpose it next year because we've convinced ourselves it just wasn't time. Or we said all the time, you know, when sometimes God doesn't say no, He says not now. No, sometimes He says no. And in history, sometimes there's no. But we intend to keep doing it over and over again. And so today we're going to be talking about a law that no one wants to talk about. However, that law is the very foundation of not only this government, but many governments, both federal, state, international governments, are using that very law to take away your rights in very pivotal ways. And you just aren't paying attention because you're just going around and around and around. History. No one's excited about it, but it's impacting and it's affecting you every day, and you have no idea. Enjoy the ride.
We like to think that if we know better, maybe history won't repeat itself, but unfortunately, it's just not true. We simply find new excuses to repeat the same bad things and hope for better results. Today, I want to talk to you about the fugitive slave laws. And before you go running away, I want to explain to you how that same law is affecting hundreds of millions of people, even as we speak today. It's just going under the radar. No one's paying attention. See, it works because someone is benefiting. And when we say slavery was an institution, we simply are merely repeating the very words of those who we now call heroes. These laws enacted in the United States had profound and devastating consequences on enslaved people, people seeking freedom. They represented legal frameworks that actively pursued and returned individuals who had escaped bondage with the approval of the federal and state authorities. Understanding these laws isn't just about remembering the past, it's about recognizing the immense courage of those who defied those laws and then their enduring struggle for human dignity and liberty.
All right, let me explain this really quick. So here's a map of the United States back in 1850. As you can see, the states out west didn't really exist. They were just territories. They were just being stolen from the native Indians at the time. So the blue states in the south, that's where the slaves were allowed to be purchased. And this was the slave states. Those states in the north, slavery was permitted. It just wasn't considered a slave state. As you can add more states, the Congress would have to decide which states were going to be slaves and which were going to be free states. So the war against the North and the South had everything to do with keeping those slaves in the states and not letting them leave and run away. So there's the catch. If you allowed them to run away, you lose everything. Your collateral is gone. You owe the lender. You have no money. So this is why Congress was needed to put a law in place to keep them from running. This was Mount Vernon. I went there, visited the home of George Washington. That's Mount Vernon, our very first president of the United States. Might as well get some dessert while I'm there. George Washington's brother Lawrence had died. He had left the property to his widow. The widow decided to get remarried, which she needs to lease the property to George Washington. This is what they used to pay for it. Now that she was remarried, giving her the right to lease Mount Vernon along with half of the deceased Lawrence's slaves. They were the collateral for the lease of George Washington to take this land. So here's the final the portion of that lease. If anything was to happen to those slaves that you just used as collateral, you now owe us money for each of them that is gone. So if it was a man, you owe us $800. If it is a woman, you owe us $500. This is why you can't let them run away, because you then have to come out of your pocket. That was collateral money.
In simple terms, the Fugitive Slave Act, it was passed in 1850. That was a federal law that significantly strengthened the ability of a slaveholder to recapture anyone who had escaped, who had been enslaved, and who had gone to a free state. Essentially, it allowed regular everyday citizens in free states to assist in the return and the recapture of those individuals. That meant that anyone could be deputized to help apprehend a runaway slave. And so there were penalties for anyone who refused to do this. Now, why would Congress support such a divisive piece of legislation? Well, the context is clear. The nation was teetering on the brink of a civil war. There was a compromise between the North and the South called the Compromise of 1850. It was an attempt to appease the Southern states whose economy was deeply intertwined with slavery, and the Northern states where support for freeing the enslaved, it was growing. So for the South, the act was seen as essential to protecting the property rights and maintaining the institution of slavery. They argued that without it, their economic stability in the South, it would be threatened, it would crumble. And I'll explain just how much they really needed it. You won't believe it. So, from the perspective of those who supported it, the act was framed as upholding the Constitution, and I'll show you that, and maintaining some national unity. They thought this was about pride. They believed that by addressing the issue of escaped enslaved people, they could prevent further breaking of the country. They could hold it together if they address this. It was deeply flawed, the compromise, however. They prioritized the rights of slaveholders over the fundamental human rights of the enslaved individuals. This law had profound and devastating consequences, fueling the abolitionist movement, the people who supported freeing them, and deepening the moral chasm within the nation. It's a stark reminder of how deeply entrenched and ingrained this complex issue of slavery was, and the length to which people went to preserve it and not dismantle it. As I explain this, see if you can identify any similarities with current laws in your city, state, or country. Yes, country. Philippines, I see you. Ghana, you cutting it real close too. States like Texas used the fugitive slave law to use it as precedent to make abortions illegal in that state recently, requiring neighbors and families to report on each other for money. Just if someone left the state to go get an abortion, Google it. The very law used to recapture slaves in 1850 was the very law used in the US Supreme Court. Let's break it down. It was so public that if your slave escaped, newspaper ads were placed in hopes of getting help to find them. I'm going to post a few as I explain the laws section, just so you understand it better. So, Section 5 of the Fugitive Slave Law. Section 5 says this section primarily dealt with the process of returning escaped enslaved people to their enslavers. It established that the testimony of the alleged fugitive or slave was inadmissible in court. This meant that the word of the person claiming ownership held more weight than the person seeking freedom. Section 6 of the Fugitive Slave Law. This law dealt with, the process of capturing and returning slaves. It granted federal courts the authority to hear the cases and issue certificates of removal. If I find you, I can come get you. More importantly, the law said that the testimony of the person you claimed as your slave would not be heard. So anyone could accuse you of being a slave and you could not defend yourself in court. That was the law. The law in this section also said that judges should be paid for helping you get your slaves returned. What could possibly go wrong with that? So, Section 7 of the Fugitive Slave Law. Again, this section was particularly impactful because it essentially shifted the burden of proof. Instead of slaveholders needing to prove someone was their escaped enslaved person, the law stated that the sworn testimony of the claimant was enough to establish ownership. That meant that the person could be captured and returned to slavery based solely on the word of another with very little recourse for the accused. So it imposed penalties on anyone who aided and abetted your escape, enslaved person, making it incredibly dangerous for those who wished to help. If you helped them in any way, escaped from their owners, you would be fined $1,000. That's in the law, or jailed, or both. So Section 8 says any person who aided or assisted in the escape of the enslaved person by providing them with food, shelter, or transportation would be subject to severe penalties. These penalties included fines and imprisonment. You could go to jail. The law also said that anyone who would prevent or obstruct arresting that person, if you block me from getting that person, you face legal consequences for preventing it. ICE. Essentially, this made it more difficult for enslaved individuals to find help anywhere they went, which was the point. If you try to find sanctuary, we're going to penalize the people helping you. That literally was the entire point. The fugitive slave law. Anything about this looks similar? When looking for ads to show you today, I ran across several that you might find a bit shocking. When we examine historical documents, we're sometimes we're going to encounter advertisements for runaway enslaved people placed by prominent figures of the time, including George Washington, America's first president, Andrew Jackson, who is on the $20 bill. You know, these ads detail physical descriptions, skills, and sometimes rewards for the return of individuals who had escaped from their own plantations. Slavery was a deeply entrenched institution. And so Thomas Jefferson, America's third president, was the first president of the United States to bring slaves into the White House. His name was John Freeman. He was rented by Jefferson. He worked there for 8 years and was sold to the next president, James Madison. And after 4 years, he was set free as a deal they had arranged, but more like an Airbnb. You buy the slave, you rent them to people who need them. It was a way you would flip a house. You just made money as an investment. Because we studied so much, I studied Thomas Jefferson myself so much in the past, I saw this ad and I recognized the name John Wells as his father-in-law. Randolph was Jefferson's mom's maiden name. Her name was Jane Randolph. So these names just populate, but it was so common that even people of prominent figures had no problem. Benjamin Franklin even had one. I'll try to find that ad. He had posted one. They had no shame because this was just the way things were done. Okay, guys, so I'm here at Plymouth Church. Like I said before, if you're familiar with the book Uncle Tom's Cabin, its author, Harriet Beecher Stowe, this is her brother. He is the founder of this church, Henry Ward Beecher. So we're going to go inside. Listen, there is a hidden surprise I'm going to show you. You will not believe this. I'm sure I broke the rule by touching it, but we'll see. Hang on, as promised. Here we go. So we're inside Plymouth Church. I got the place to myself. How awesome is that? So I wanted to bring this to you. This is the Oregon First Church for pilgrims here. You could see this is the actual spot that Abraham Lincoln sat in. This is his signature. These white people, guys. Plymouth Church would be a stop on that Underground Railroad.
a safe haven for runaway slaves seeking refuge, food, and shelter. Henry Ward Beecher and the Plymouth Church would often pay their fines to their previous owners to ensure they would never be bothered. Coming up here, the guide turns off the light to give us an indication of what a darkened room looked like for those enslaved people seeking shelter. Traveling often with families and children, this is the path to freedom. Standing there, able to touch the very spaces they sought shelter.
Valerie, if you look the other way, I'm gonna touch it without you. All right, so every video I select a person or a service that I find impactful in some way. And so today I wanted to choose AfricanAncestry.com. This is not an ad for them. Like, I don't know those people. They don't give me nothing. All right. I just want to shout out what that is. If you all have done your ancestry, you've traced your lineage, let me know in the comments what you find. Who did you use? And what was that experience like? I want to be able to pass on information, and you can help with that as well. Just leave that information in the comments, and you can go back and forth if necessary. But there is a difference for me in why I've chosen AfricanAncestry.com, partially because the strands of African DNA stored allows a more detailed search, as opposed to some of the others. Not to knock them, but if I'm looking for where I've come from, some of them with less specimens to use may not be the best for me, right? So I'm using them, and I want to stick with, my people. So I think that's where that is. But I want to know where you've gone, what your experience was like. One of the other benefits to African ancestry is because it just doesn't go to like the region. It goes like tribal, you know what I mean? And not that you need that, but it's good to know. And if you can, why not? So the other thing is you get to choose which side of the family, your mom or your dad. And you can be more strategic if there are multiple people in your family. You get mom, I'll get dad, that kind of thing. And so anyway, my shout out is for the team at AfricanAncestry.com. I know it's a company, but the team there, they feel this mission, and so I love what they're doing for all of our people. I love, what they're doing. And so I want to just take this opportunity to shout them out for what they're doing and keep it up. Anything that you can add, please do. But that is my shout out for today, AfricanAncestry.com. In a future video, if I didn't say this, I'm going to trace mine, and you're going to see from beginning to end what that process was like. Because when we start talking about people going from this continent to Africa or not, many of those countries require African ancestry, right? So if you're looking at citizenship or residency, more like citizenship, they're going to want to know, who are you? And so as their laws are changing in many of those countries, some of them are now allowing people to come and get citizenship if that's your decision. If it's not, great, right? It may just be something you want to know. So anyway, that's my shout out of the day. Thanks for joining today. As always, I love to give you a heads up of what's coming next. We're going to do something fun. And I love museums. And this time, we're going to be heading to the Museum of Ice Cream. That's a real thing. But I want to show you how something the world has found joy in, and how it affects us and our contributions to this. You're going to be amazed, but you're also going to love the Museum of Ice Cream. It's something you haven't seen. I know I haven't seen it, and they're fun. I'll see you then. Listen, if there's anything we could ever do, my information is on the screen. Reach out, communicate, follow the page. It helps me continue to bring you the information. A simple like, subscribe. That's the trick. Thanks as always. I'll see you in the next video.